Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. I hope you're having a good morning so far. It's a very pretty day out. Today, we'll be talking about coping with life transition. So the two people presenting today are like me. My name is Velina, and I'm joined by my colleague and my teammate, Alessia, and we're from Adler Community Health Services. So the topic today, coping with life transitions, we thought would be a good topic, I think, to talk about because in the past 2 years, I think healthcare workers have gone through a huge like transition, lots of changes happening, I think, in your job roles and like in your personal lives as well. So what we're hoping is today's topic can provide you some sort of validation for what you're going through, and also maybe some skills you can take home and use like while we're still in the midst of this transition. So we're going to start off here. Alessia's going to tell you what we're going to be covering today.
Okay, so we'll be starting off just talking about what are transitions and then talking about the physiological elements to transitions as well as the emotions that come up. And then lastly, we'll be giving you some skills and tools, hopefully on top of some that you already have to help cope with transitions.
Yeah. So why should we learn this? Like, why do we care about transitions? And I thought I was really funny when I did this. So life transitions are a part of life, right? You've probably had many transitions through your life. And understanding the process and the stages of transitions can help us discern where we're at. And my supervisor, an old supervisor of mine, used to say this all the time: if you can name it, you can tame it. And so what we're hoping today is, if we kind of go through all the stages of transition and kind of talk about what you can expect, the next time that's a huge transition that you're going through, you might be like, oh my God, yes, I know what this is. I'm going to be better equipped to handle it.
So I found this really interesting. When we talk about transitions, it's a little bit different than changes. So changes are things that we all go through. They're the specific event that occurs. So something like potentially changing jobs or moving, the death of a loved one, a new marriage or a divorce. And so changes can be voluntary or involuntary, on time and expected, or unexpected and potentially devastating. So some of those emotions that are really uncomfortable can come with unexpected changes. However, sometimes changes can be voluntary and expected, and these situations typically bring about positive emotions, the ones that feel good to us. The difference with transitions is that's psychological process that we go through in response to the change. It's what happens within us. So the constellation of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions that we have in response to the change. So what happens is the change happens, and then hopefully we go through this transition process and come out of it different, maybe with new meaning about the situation or a different reorientation to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So Alessia, I think, did a great job of like explaining the differences between changes and transitions. And so we're gonna go through I'm gonna go through the examples of life changes, I think, that we might all experience. And I might miss some, and later there's a question and comment section. You can totally feel free to add some stuff that I think I might be missing. So some examples will include like loss of a relationship, right? Death of a loved one, change in your career, or loss of a job. And I think for many of us, maybe during the pandemic, it's not only change in career, loss of a job, but maybe change in our job responsibilities, maybe our scope change or added pressures or added responsibilities. And that can be a huge change and can cause a period of transition as well. The loss of a role in life. Maybe you're no longer a caretaker or a guardian to somebody. Maybe you're no longer a parent to somebody because if kid moved out or something like that. Getting engaged or being married, becoming pregnant. And I think these two, like getting engaged, married, becoming pregnant, it's a good example too of, like Alessia was saying, sometimes we want the change to happen and it's a positive change for most of us. But that being said, that is still a change and can come with a period of transition. So recognizing that change can be positive, that can bring about positive or negative changes, but we all go through a transitionary period. entering a different phase of life. I think all of us can remember what it was like to go into adolescence and the transition that came with that. Retirement or illness, chronic illness, short-term illness can be a huge change to our everyday life.
So Kubler-Ross has made this type of a curve to depict what it looks like when we go through changes. And so when I was looking at this, I was thinking about the COVID pandemic. And this, to me, totally applied to that. So when there's an unexpected change, I think this applies the most, but this can also happen when there are expected changes as well. The first thing that happens is shock, a state of surprise of the event, kind of jars you, you don't know what to make of it. And at this point, morale is still pretty high. And then there's kind of a period of denial. And we know we've seen some people that maybe continue to be in this phase, really looking for evidence that something isn't true, because it can be a difficult thing to come to terms with. And at this point, morale is still high. But then once we realize, hey, this change is here to stay, something either needs to be done about it or I have to accept it, there can be some frustration. And sometimes that frustration can lead to anger at others, anger towards ourselves, resistance to the change. And that's where morale really starts to drop. And usually with change, there is a period of depression or low mood or a lack of energy until we start to kind of integrate that change and experiment with new ways to engage with the situation. And then eventually we have to make a decision. How are we going to work with this new situation? How are we going to live life with this change? And that's where we start to feel more positive. That's where we start to have a little bit more control. And then there's a period of integration. This is where the transition happens. The change is integrated into yourself. So how you perceive your life and how you perceive yourself moving forward. And this can happen where you become a renewed individual, where you actually end up feeling pretty good about the change, or at least start to accept it.
So that being said, based on in the literature that we found, there are 3 stages of transition, and recognizing that the stages are not like super clear cut, they kind of like go into each other in sort of a flowing way, but I am going to go through each of the stage. So the first stage here of a transition is the ending, right? Or the losing or letting go of something. All transitions start with an ending. That sounds so like poetic and like cool, I know. But in this stage, right, it would be helpful, I'm not telling everyone what to do, but it would be helpful for us, I think, to identify what we're losing, right? Naming it like, oh, I'm losing this person or that thing or a job. What is ending specifically? What are you letting go? And with that being said, like what we're letting go, it is also important, I think, for us to determine what we're going to keep, right? Like, what are we going to bring with us as we continue forward? What are we choosing to leave behind? And so once we identify what it is we're losing, identify what it is we want to keep, I think the next step would be accepting the reality, right, of the loss. And Alessia was talking about denial earlier. And when we're in denial, it doesn't allow us to move forward. You can get stuck at that part and you're like always there, denial, refusing to realize that like moving on can be healing for you as well. And in this stage, I think it is so normal to feel strong emotions. And like we have there, like fear, denial, anger, sadness, maybe some disorientation, frustration, and grief. And all these feelings are part of losing something or someone or letting something go. And being prepared to feel those strong emotions, I think, can help us be prepared to feel them, and it will be less of a shock to us. And again, I think in this stage, being compassionate to the fact that you will be grieving and accepting that you will be grieving, even if what you're doing is like a chosen thing, like you're choosing to let go, you're choosing to go forward. And if it's appropriate or if you're able to, compensating for the loss can be really helpful here. Because when a loss happens, you might find that you have extra time. Maybe there's a gap in your life, and compensating for it with new productive, healthy habits can be helpful for you as you move through the transitionary period. And so now we're talking about transition. That's when you enter the neutral zone. And the neutral zone can be sort of like being in limbo, right? You're now letting go of, like, the old is gone, but the new is not there yet. You're like in the middle, just like when you're 12 years old, like you're not really a teenager yet, and you're like waiting for something to happen. And this is a great zone for us to like realign ourselves, form new patterns, and create temporary systems for ourselves to cope while we wait for something new to happen. And in this stage, it's, I think, accepting that you are going to be confused, maybe a little bit scared, maybe feeling uncertain. An uncertain future is scary for all of us. And I think accepting that you're human and that you're going to feel these feelings is going to help you go through the zone a bit easier. And so once you're done with the transition zone or the neutral zone, then you start with the new beginning. This is the part where like things are starting again. Like maybe you're into the new job, maybe you're in a new relationship, maybe you're married now and you're living a life as a married person. And the new beginning is so exciting, maybe a little bit scary for some of us. But just like this butterfly, that's why the picture is here, this caterpillar. It didn't get to be a butterfly without going through all the difficult, icky part. Like, I just wanted to say, I don't know if anyone knows this, but butterflies, when they go into that little like chrysalis thing, they become goo. Like, they become goo and they reconstitute themselves. That's just you. You're becoming goo and you're starting all over again. And that's why the picture is there. Okay, thank you. Alessia's gonna talk more now.
Great analogy.
Thanks.
So like Bill was saying, there are a lot of emotions associated with transitions, and they're perfectly normal. Emotions are really universal. We all experience them. And some of the most common ones are fear, anger, sadness, probably associated with transition or with a change that we don't necessarily want or see coming. Joy, shock and surprise, guilt and or shame. And those are just a few. And I wanted to include this diagram here because emotions really do appear in our body. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about physiological symptoms associated with transitions. But just having a look at where the emotions appear in your body. And if you notice physiological changes associated with transitions and stress, it might be coming from an emotion. So like Phil said, if you can name it, you can tame it. It's really helpful to recognize when these emotions are happening and where they're happening in our body.
And so, yeah, like Alessia was saying, there are physiological changes that come from the mental symptoms, right, of a transition. And those symptoms can include like an increase or decrease in your appetite. That could be from like anxiety, maybe headaches, muscle tension. Maybe you're noticing now your body, you're like realizing muscle tension. You're realizing that you have muscle aches all over your body as if you've been working out in the gym all the time. You might feel stomach ache, stomach discomfort, nausea. I don't really want to eat. You might feel really, really fatigued, like low motivation. You're super tired all the time, even though you're trying to get rest. Sleep changes. Maybe you're sleeping more than usual, right? Or maybe you're sleeping really little. You're waking up earlier than you want to. Maybe you're going to bed later than you want to because you're in bed, just staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. You might also notice changes in your sex drive. Maybe your sex drive is increasing or maybe decreasing. So just anything from your baseline that's like going up or down, just noticing that these are things that can happen in a transition, and having this compassion and grace, I think, to allow these changes to just take place, recognizing that they're there, knowing that they will go away eventually.
So sometimes when the symptoms don't go away right away, they can develop into more serious issues and mental health conditions. So sometimes with transition can come periods of depression or anxiety, cognitive issues like trouble concentrating or feeling confused, mood swings, changes in sex drive, using substances as a way to cope. So when difficult emotions come in, it can be tempting to use substances to help cope, lack of motivation, and withdrawal from others or isolation, maybe feeling like others don't understand us or that we'd be better off just kind of being alone. And so noticing these things too, and again, like Bill was saying, allowing some compassion for these things and reaching out for help if you are noticing that you're struggling with any of these things.
Yeah. So I think we've tried to cover as much about transitions as you can. You're probably like, help this, like, what do we do? Great. So we're gonna start covering how to cope effectively with transitions. And so the next few slides are gonna involve, we're gonna talk a little bit about the window of tolerance and explaining what that is, how to manage distress in times of transition or big changes, and some tools to help you self-regulate in the long term. So Alessia is gonna start us off here, I think, with window of tolerance.
So I think when we talk about stressful situations and difficult changes, it's really important to talk about the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is this state in which we are an arousal state where we're feeling calm, where we're feeling centered, in touch with ourselves, and really able to cope with the difficult things that arise throughout the day. And so in the window of tolerance, we're more able to use the skills that we already have. We're more able to reach out for help and deal with our stress. But what can happen is when stress gets really high, and if this change isn't the only stressor going on, you're likely to enter a period of either hypoarousal or hyperarousal. So two different states that we all experience from time to time. Now, hypoarousal is the freeze response. When we're feeling really stressed out and we feel that we can't cope, we feel that we can't problem solve, sometimes we go into a hypoarousal mode. And what happens here is that your brain gets foggy, you become more emotionally numb, and potentially dissociate. So where you're not really experiencing things that are going on, you're more detached. On the other end of the spectrum is hyperarousal. This is the fight or flight mode. And so with this mode, our mind is often racing, our anxiety is looping, we're having really difficult thoughts that can cause us to feel out of control. And even though it feels like we're thinking through our problem, if we're in this state, we're usually not thinking totally rationally. So it's important to notice if we've gone into either of these states and to try to bring ourselves back into the window of tolerance. And the skills that we're going to be providing are just a few that will help us get into that state and hopefully help cope with changes and move into transition a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to just talk about the symptoms associated with hypoarousal, like how to know if you're in a hypoarousal state, right? You might notice yourself being really feeling really depressed. And some of the symptoms of depression can include extreme fatigue. You feel really low self-worth. You feel like there's no point to doing things. You just want to be alone. You just want to lie down. And that comes with feelings of numbness, right? I'm sure everyone has experienced times when things are so many things are happening around us and you feel overwhelmed. The safest thing to do is maybe to check out, to feel numb, to feel nothing, sort of empty inside. So the numbness and emptiness kind of go hand in hand to feel like there's a hole in your, a void, flaccid body. It's I know it's a funny way of saying it, but think of yourself as feeling really limp, you just want to, you're dragging yourself everywhere, sort of like you don't have bones. That's the kind of vibe I'm just trying to say here with the flaccid body. Maybe blank stares. Maybe you're catching yourself staring off into space. People are talking to you and you're you can't focus. They're talking to you, you see their lips moving and you're I don't know, I'm just staring into space. You might feel you can't speak, speaking is such a chore, and you might find yourself having difficulty knowing what to say in the moment as well. And finally, dissociation, right? Feeling being in reality or where you are so unsafe that you're in your mind, you're thinking about other things, you're just checking out, maybe you're daydreaming very often, more so than usual. Again, with the caveat that daydreaming is healthy sometimes, but noticing when it's so much that like you're not in reality, people are saying like, hey, where are you? Like you're not listening to anything I'm saying, maybe that could be you experiencing symptoms of hypoarousal. You're just checking out.
I just wanted to add that these responses are completely automatic. They're not our fault. It's our body's way that we've evolved in order to keep us safe. And so it's really, there's no blame associated with this. It's not our fault that this happens. However, we can start to notice the signs and then help ourselves go back into a state of where our window of tolerance is there.
Thanks, Alessia.
So hyperarousal looks kind of a total opposite of hypoarousal. And this is where we might be overly irritable and prone to angry outbursts, where we're experiencing an intense sense of fear or dread, like something bad is going to happen. Anxiety. So anxiety can look like difficulty sleeping. It can look like agitation. It can look like really ruminative thoughts or intrusive thoughts. Emotional overwhelm. So crying a lot. Again, getting very angry. Panic. So signs of a panic attack would be like a racing heart, feeling of dread, feeling like you can't breathe. Hypervigilance, so scanning your environment for danger, noticing the issues around you or the problems and really paying attention to them. And tight muscles, feeling really tense. So again, our body really feels this, right?
So next, like really want to talk about managing your window of tolerance. So when we say managing our window of tolerance, there are two things, right? Like one is what we're talking about, recognizing our window of tolerance and increasing our awareness to symptoms. So knowing like, oh my God, I'm out of my window right now. I'm reactive. Maybe I'm spacing out. Maybe I'm withdrawing much more than I would like. And the next thing would be like regulating, like, so naming it like I'm going through hyperarousal, regulating to come back to the to our window of tolerance. But today we're, like Alessia and I are also going to present some skills for you to increase your window of tolerance, right? So we'll first talk about like coming back to our window, because like Alessia said, you can't learn skills, you can't use skills if you're not in the sweet spot. But also in the long term, I think it'd be useful for us to increase our window of tolerance. So the next time a change or transition happens, we're more likely to cope with it better because again, our window is bigger. And that's why this picture is like a huge window of a guy staring off into the sunset, I'm guessing. So the next thing here will be, I think the first thing to managing your window of tolerance is mindfulness. I know, like, so for those of you who attended last week's session on how to regulate emotions, this might be a recap. And I think that speaks a lot as to how important mindfulness is. Like we've included it in all our slides now. Because the first step, I think, to regulating is recognizing what's going on for you. So what is mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is the act of consciously focusing the mind on the present moment without judgment. The without judgment piece is like something I definitely struggle with a lot. So based on the DBT manual, like mindfulness is broken up into what and how skills. So what is mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is observing the present moment. So most of the time we just do things, but if you sit back and just watch yourself, that's the thing. The part of you that notices or watches what you do, what you say to others, what you're thinking, that's the observing part of you. And then the next step is describing what happens, because I think so often something happens and we get caught up in our emotions and our interpretations of events, and we miss out on the describing aspect of what is actually happening. What am I noticing within myself? What behaviors am I noticing in other people? And participating, so mindfully participating. And this, I know, is tied to a little bit of hypoarousal. I think, again, Alessia said, not nobody's fault, but when we do get when we go outside of our window of tolerance, yeah, it can be tempting to step back and not really participate, to just watch as things happen. But like part of mindfulness is participating in those things, even if they can be quite difficult at times. And so how do we do this, right? The first thing is non-judgmentally. As humans, okay, all of us want to categorize good or bad because it helps us understand what is dangerous and what is not. But that sometimes can get influenced by our state of mind, our moods, our emotions at the time. But mindfulness brings us back to the present of noticing what's going on without ascribing judgment. So if you lost a job, just like I lost my job, this is the events that happened, instead of like I'm a failure or I suck, things like that. One, mindfully. I think many times we participate in events without really being there. And last week I was giving this example of like, you leave work, you drive home, and the next thing you know, you're like, I'm home. Don't really remember how I got here. Don't remember my path. Don't remember the traffic lights. You're cooking dinner. Next thing you know, you have a meal and you're eating and you're like, I don't remember doing any of this. So one, mindfully, is being present. Like, I'm driving right now. What roads am I taking? What am I doing? Watching your surroundings. And effectively, I think can be quite challenging, but often when we are encountering a situation, we want to be right. We want to do the things that will make us feel good in the moment, but effectively, it's like, how will we feel in the long run? What is the effective thing to do that won't, I guess, I don't know. It's like, this is more like a delayed gratification. If I act this way now, will I benefit in the long run? How effective is my behavior versus I want to be right. I want to feel good in the moment. I don't want to feel bad right now. And see, these are the aspects that go into mindfulness. And again, mindfulness is important. Just like we talked about the window of tolerance, without mindfulness, you won't know where you're at. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So like we talked about, the body goes through changes when we feel stressed. And so sometimes it's really hard to tackle our emotions or to tackle our thoughts. And when we're noticing, especially in a state of hyper arousal, where we feel like we're losing control, it's helpful to tackle the body. And so how do we do this? There's 4 tips here. And just keep in mind that some things work really well for some people that don't work as well for others. So it's important to try different things. So we'll start with the first one. Tip the temperature. So this means we're changing the temperature of our body. This is based on something called the dive reflex. The dive reflex is an evolutionary adaptation that when we get or when we fall in a body of water, for example. So think about if you've ever jumped into a glacier lake, how you feel that your heart is almost stopping. The reflex is that when we are in a body of water that's really cold, our heart tends to slow down, and it actually produces this sense of relaxation and calm. And so to mimic this, what we do is we would fill, let's say, a bowl full of water with some ice, dunk your head in the bowl of water, and hold your breath. And pretty instantly, you should start to notice that your heart rate slows down and that you feel a lot calmer. Another way to mimic this would be to take a really cold shower or to take an ice cube and rub it along your face, because I bet you don't all have ice buckets lying around all the time. The next thing is intense exercise. So this could just be for a few moments, like doing a bunch of jumping jacks or doing some push-ups, or it could be like going for a really long run, a fast walk, anything that really gets your heart rate up. So this helps to release some of the anxious energy, and in turn, it kind of stimulates the endorphins and makes us feel a lot better and a lot calmer. The next one is paced breathing. So paced breathing, we want to breathe out longer than we're breathing in. So you would take an inhale for 5 seconds, and then you'd exhale for 7 seconds. And you do this over and over again until you start to feel your heart rate go down. So the exhale actually engages more of a calming reflex in our body. And so that's why we want to engage in that a little bit longer than the inhale. And lastly, paired muscle relaxation. So muscle relaxation would be where we tense really, really tight and then we release. With paired muscle relaxation, we're tensing really, really tight while we breathe in, and then we release while we breathe out. And it's important to notice the feeling of relaxation as we're untensing.
I just want to add, I think Alessia told me this last week. She was talking about how relief is such like a appreciated emotion. I think this goes with the paired muscle relaxation, right? Noticing the relief in your body and like, oh my God, relief is great. So thanks. That was Alessia's just like nuggets of tidbits, like golden information type things.
Yeah, and I was just thinking like, even just now, if you could notice like if your shoulders are kind of at your ears or if your jaw is tight, just trying to release that and notice the difference in your body.
Yeah.
So another tip for coping with life changes would be to cope ahead. So there's 5 steps to coping ahead. The first one is describing the situation that's causing you anxiety. And often what happens when we have an anxious situation, we kind of stop before we're describing what the actual part of the situation causing us anxiety is. So for example, let's say you're anticipating a really stressful meeting with your boss. What about it are you fearing? What about it is causing you the anxiety? What is the worst case scenario that you're anticipating? So really getting to the root of the anxiety. If you can name it, you can tame it. Next, decide what you need to do to be effective. So what do you need to say or do? Let's say the worst case scenario does happen. How would you act? And are there coping skills or stress management techniques that you already know that would be helpful here? See, if you're thinking about it in advance in a safe space, like maybe your home, then you can more easily access the coping skills than if you just kind of come at it in the moment where it feels less safe. And this goes back to the window of tolerance. When we feel safe, when we feel regulated, we can think more clearly. So that's why you want to do this ahead of time. Next, imagine the situation fully. So close your eyes and really imagine that you're in this moment. Who's going to be there? What are the surroundings like? What are some of the details of the situation? Now, this can cause a little bit of anxiety because you're almost like living the situation as it's happening. But the point is that you're in a safe space and you have the ability to control things at this point. So imagine the situation fully. And then rehearse coping effectively. So you can even do this out loud. Imagine saying things exactly how you want to say them and the situation actually going well. When we have anxiety, we imagine the worst case scenario. We imagine all the worst things that could possibly happen, and we really believe it. So the challenge is to really think about how could it go differently? How could it go well? And then imagine that you do encounter the worst case scenario or the stressful situation, and imagine that you're coping well with it, that you've actually been able to access those tools and cope well. And the 5th step is really important. We want to practice relaxation after rehearsing. Like I said, the anxiety can get really heightened when you're really imagining that situation. What you want to do is then pair relaxation with this anxiety. So you're kind of tricking your brain into saying, hey, I can actually control this situation. I can actually feel okay in this. So how do you do that? Deep breathing, like we talked about, meditation or mindfulness, and grounding technique. So really simple grounding technique is a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. So you're looking around the room, you're naming 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And so you're just using your senses to really bring yourself back into the moment.
And then the next thing would be checking your self-talk, right? But in a compassionate way. And I think this goes well with like coping ahead when Alessia was talking about like how we have anxiety, we anticipate situations, we're like, oh my God, it's gonna go bad. I'm not gonna be able to handle it. Then you think about all the other times you didn't handle things, but again, missing out on times that you did handle things well, right? That's our brain, that's what we do. So our brains have evolved, so many years. And our main thing, I think, is surviving or protection from harm. So when we feel anxiety, when we feel fear, when we think about all the things that go horribly, what we're actually doing is we're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to survive. We're trying to anticipate all the things that could go wrong so that we can handle it better. But that being said, if we don't rehearse and cope effectively, we're just ruminating. And so when we come up with stories, I think, or produce stories in our mind of all the things that could go wrong, our thoughts lead to feelings that like of depression or anxiety or really like lots of distress. Now you're like mentally feeling horrible, and then physically you start feeling really bad as well. And now you're just like out of your window of tolerance, you're unable to cope. And last week we talked about this too. We also often view our thoughts as facts. Like that's why we talked about check the facts last week, right? The DDT skill. I think I have to say this to myself very often too, like emotions are not facts. My thoughts are not facts. And a lot of the times when our emotions get involved, our thoughts, our perception of reality can be very distorted. And this is the mindfulness skill of like non-judgmentally being very important, right? Knowing that like we are prescribing our own like opinions to things. And so instead of focusing whether a thought is true or false and like getting caught up in like, is this real? I need to find out if it's real. Ask yourself if the thought is helpful. So then with the mindfulness house skill, is this effective or ineffective? Am I going to benefit by thinking this way? Am I going to benefit by the thoughts that I'm having? And in relation to the transitions, are these thoughts helping me cope with the transition, or am I making it more difficult for myself, right? And rather than like getting caught up in the thoughts, I think it's very important if we just spend some time thanking ourselves, like, thank you very much for bringing up all the horrible things that could go wrong. I hear you. I think you're trying to keep me safe. And I think doing this offers us self-compassion and grace, right? Recognizing that we're not trying to screw things up for ourselves. We're not trying to be anxious on purpose. Nothing is wrong with us. Instead, we're actually doing what we think we need to do to be safe. And I think in this situation, offering yourself compassion can also give you the permission to be like, I hear your thoughts, but these are things that will be more effective and helpful for me. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure you've heard about sleep hygiene before, but I think it's just so important to talk about in terms of getting back into your window of tolerance. Sleep is a huge part of being able to regulate our stress. So if you're not able to sleep lately or because of a change that's been happening, then this slide is for you. So biggest thing is avoiding caffeine late in the day. If you're a caffeine drinker and you're noticing that your mind is really spinning at night and you can't slow down, it might be that you're having caffeine a little bit too late in the day. Now, this might be hard for some people, but keeping a regular sleep routine for the entire week. So I understand if you're on shift work, it's not always achievable. And so if it's not, then skip that and try other things. But that can really help keep us regulated, and our body just to be on the same schedule every day can help have some element of control and predictability. Drinking alcohol, this is kind of counterintuitive because we feel sometimes that alcohol can help us relax.
Yeah.
But what actually happens is a few hours after we drink alcohol, it goes from a depressant into a stimulant in your body. And it actually elevates your heart rate and can really affect your sleep. And you might not be waking up, but you might not be having the best sleep that you can. Temperature of the room, your bed, your sheets, important, like super practical, just making sure that your sleep environment is comfortable. If you notice that you're lying awake in bed and that this feels really anxiety provoking because your thoughts are spinning and you can't relax, try to get up. If it's more than 30 minutes, try to do a relaxing activity or something really boring or mundane until you feel sleepy again. Really important to relax before bed. So reading a book, listening to relaxing music, or meditating. Try to stay away from really stressful TV shows or
Murder
having
mysteries.
having like a difficult conversation before bed, not the time. White noise machine for noisy surroundings. So if you live in the city and you're finding that that's interfering with your sleep, you could either get a white noise machine, or I know that there's some free apps that have white noise, and even Spotify will have like, I think they have like an 8-hour white noise track. Reducing blue light throughout the day. So we know that the blue light from our phones and our computers impacts melatonin production, which can delay our sleep onset. So I think that most computers and phones have a setting where you can turn off the blue light, and that can actually be really helpful in terms of helping you fall asleep earlier when you want to. Exercising during the day. And then if you're on any medications that you've noticed are affecting your sleep, check with your doctor, see if you can get those altered. And naps, really long naps throughout the day can affect sleep. So if you're noticing that, then cutting down on long naps.
Yeah, and sorry, in terms of caffeine, I just wanted to share this bit. I was reading the story once where they did a study on like the half-life of caffeine. I don't remember like how many milligrams of caffeine they like were studying, but they found that like the half-life of caffeine is 7 hours. So if you're drinking caffeine at 4 p.m., like that amount of caffeine that you drink is only reduced by half at 11 p.m. So do with that what you will, right? Plan your caffeine shots, I guess, or doses, throughout the day.
Great tidbit.
Thank you. And so like we're coming to the end now, and like other tools I think for us to cope ahead or plan for ourselves when we know a transition is coming, is creating a schedule to try to give yourself some predictability, right? If you already have a schedule, then looking at your schedule again, thinking about how you can make it smoother. And this is because transitions can really like disrupt our daily functioning. And the thing about humans is that most people do really well with schedules. Most people do really well with repetition every day because it makes our brains feel like, oh, we know what to expect. It doesn't feel so anxious. It feels safe. So in times of disarray, creating a schedule or giving yourself some consistency day to day can help with feelings of safety, right? Which can reduce anxiety and depression. Reduce, not cure. Self-care, schedule it in. I know like we throw things around like self-care. And the thing is, self-care can look different for everybody. So recognizing what it is, what activities make you feel rejuvenated, what activities fill your cup, scheduling it in. And, like we're not saying getting a massage every day for an hour. If it's 10 minutes of drinking your favorite coffee or going on a walk for 10 minutes, and that's what makes you feel like you're taking care of yourself, I think scheduling it in will make you feel better in the long run than skipping it. Taking things one day at a time. I think most of the time we are in a rush to predict the future, especially when you're going through a transition. You're like, when will this be over? I need to know now so I can plan ahead. Fair enough. But also while you're going through a transition, every day might bring new challenges, new emotions, and taking the day as they come and experiencing and allowing yourself compassion and grace as you go through these changes is important as well. Write down the strategies that work. I know sometimes we do something and it works and we're like, yeah, I'm going to remember this, but we totally don't. And then the next time a thing happens, we're like, oh, wait, what was it that I did before? So write it down somewhere that you can see every day. Like I used to be like, no, I can remember things. Turns out I cannot. So I've learned to write things down and I'm better for it. And social connections, right? Then reflecting on whether the people around you support your plans and support your self-growth. It can be really it can be really difficult going through a transition when people around you aren't super positive and you have to like keep out that positivity for yourself, or you have to regulate all by yourself. Social connections can be very important for healing as we go through transitions. Yeah, so
okay, so we did have a couple questions during the talk. So one person was asking how we can manage angry outbursts. What can we do about that? So I was thinking about this as we went on. I think the first step is a form of mindfulness. So it's called the STOP technique. The acronym is STOP. So it stands for stop, take a step back, observe, and proceed mindfully or participate. So when we first feel like we're getting really angry, it's really important for us to try to take a step back, as hard as it might be. The impulse is to engage and to fight. But when we can take a step back and get ourselves out of that, or back into the window of tolerance a little bit better, then we can detach and think through what we want to do next. Another technique to help us with anger, it's an emotion regulation technique. It's called opposite action. And it seems kind of simple, but the goal is to try to put yourself into another person's shoes. So really try to imagine what the situation's like for them. This automatically takes us out of our own emotion and changes the emotion we're feeling. But this can really only be done once we have had an opportunity to step back and get back into that window of tolerance where our brain can think a little bit better. Phil, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So I was going to talk about opposite action. Well, we covered it last week. We're still trying to figure out how to send out the webinars, but maybe you'll watch the webinar and figure out how to handle angry outbursts better. But in terms of opposite action, I think it's important to recognize when the emotions don't fit the facts, because sometimes like maybe the anger is justified, but how you handle it is the thing that we want to change. So the opposite action to anger is like when we get angry, we want to clench our fists. So that's opening your hands up, and it's a skill in DBT called willing hands. So literally sitting with your hands like this on your lap. Yesterday, a supervisor of mine was saying that she encourages people to sit on their hands when they're angry, because when we're angry, we want to move, we want to shout, but sitting on your hands makes it difficult to move around. And so this is like Alessia was saying, hijacking the body and being like, okay, what's happening in my body? What can I stop? Noticing what happens when you're angry, you might feel really tense. So pulling shoulders away from the ears, unclenching the muscles. And opposite action can also involve literally going to watch a happy video and laughing. You might feel a bit fake in the moment. They're like, I don't really want to laugh right now, but try it. Try to go with the flow of laughing, watch the video. And this is when the emotions are too big in the moment and you need to regulate, not invalidating your emotions. Like that's not what we're saying. But if you feel like you're angry very often and you want to get a handle on it so you can address the situation later, opposite action is great for things like that. Thanks, Alessia.
I was going to add too that a lot of the time with an angry outburst, there are cues to us that we're getting irritated before the outburst comes. And it could not even be with the person that we've outbursted on. It could be that little things have been bothering us and slowly taking us outside the window of tolerance throughout the day, to the point where a lot of the time the angry outburst will happen with someone that we feel safest with, a spouse or a parent. And so what's happening is that the anger, the irritation is building throughout the day, and then we outburst to the person that we feel we can. And so noticing the things that are upsetting you throughout the day and trying to regulate them as they come, instead of letting it all out at once.
I love that you added, like, we do sometimes, I think, yell or like be our true selves around people we feel safest with, right? I like that you added that.
Yeah, it's difficult, especially when we have so much stuff going on throughout the day and where we don't have the opportunity to regulate our emotions. So that's where the self-compassion comes in. We're only human. We're trying our best. And just because we've had an emotion that we haven't handled the best way doesn't mean that we can't learn to handle it in a different way in the future. But also giving yourself some credit for trying and really doing your best throughout the day.
Alessia, I can't see the messages, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
We have another one that says, as healthcare workers, we have been in a state of hyperarousal for 2 years. What does research say about the long-term effects of this?
Great question. I think Gabor Mate wrote a book about prolonged periods of stress, and we know that like prolonged cortisol levels in the body, not to be alarmist, right? Like this is what the research says of like prolonged hyperarousal or prolonged like increased cortisol levels in the body, what can happen is that your body starts breaking down or your mental health starts suffering. So like Alessia was saying earlier, you might start experiencing depression, like having long periods of depressive episodes. You might have now anxiety that maybe you didn't have before. You might start having hypertension, like this is what the research says, hypertension. I know they're talking about prolonged periods of stress and its connection to diabetes, connection to heart problems. And I think that's why we're always talking about, oh, someone is coming in now. I think that's why as mental health professionals, we're always advocating that people take care of their mental health because it's so tied to physiological symptoms. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, unless you have
that's along the lines I was thinking, is that prolonged stress really can affect our bodies. And so it's not too late. Now is a good time to reach out for that support and try to get the tools that can at least try to bring you back into the window of tolerance once in a while throughout the day, instead of staying in that state of hyperarousal.
Yeah, that's true too. That's like, it's not too late. And our bodies are so good at adapting. And like, if you start working with it and you start changing certain habits or working with someone, if you feel like that's appropriate for you, like it's amazing how fast our brains like pick up things and our physiological responses start to change as well.
We're resilient.
Yeah, we're resilient.